Something interesting has been happening lately, and it's a little different than what you might be seeing online. People aren't just moving south anymore. They're slowing down, they're comparing cities more carefully, they're researching longer, they're asking better questions, they're looking at Florida, they're looking at Tennessee, they're looking at places like Texas, the Carolinas, and after all that comparing, Charlotte keeps showing up. All right, and it's not always showing up as the loudest option, not always the flashiest, but as the one that makes the most sense. Right? This doesn't feel like 2021 anymore. Nobody's panic buying, nobody's chasing headlines. The conversations I'm having right now are more intentional, and people want to know what their actual Tuesday is going to look like, what their commute feels like, what decisions look like, what happens 5 years from now. They're deciding, they're asking, does the city give me flexibility? Does it give me options? Or does it lock me into one version of life? Right? And that's where Charlotte quietly keeps getting chosen. Not as an impulse, but as a decision. And that difference matters. For a long time, Charlotte was easy to underestimate. It wasn't Miami, it wasn't Nashville, it wasn't Austin. It didn't dominate the headlines. Right? It wasn't trying to be trendy. But over the last decade, Charlotte has matured layer by layer. Corporate expansion, healthcare, infrastructure investment, professional sports presence, defined pockets, light communities, walkable neighborhoods. Charlotte stopped feeling like just a banking city and started functioning like a real connected metro. Right? That shift matters because it changes how it feels to actually live here. Right? Charlotte isn't trying to reinvent itself, it's refining what already works. And when you're thinking long-term, that kind of growth feels steady, not chaotic. Now, let's get specific here because Charlotte usually isn't the only city on someone's list. Tampa comes up a lot, and Tampa is incredible, right? Water access, tax advantages, but when families start thinking long-term, insurance costs become part of that conversation. Hurricane exposure becomes part of that conversation too, and that summer intensity is always going to be a part of that conversation. Now, Nashville comes up often too. Amazing culture, music scene, strong job growth, but housing supply has tightened. Price appreciation has been aggressive. Infrastructure strain is real, and for some buyers, that pace feels fast. Raleigh is another common comparison as well. Strong tech presence, you got the research triangle there, highly educated population with NC State and Duke and UNC, but Raleigh is still a little smaller, more centralized, less lifestyle range compared to Charlotte's broader metro and its lake access. Right? Then you have places like Texas. We have cities in Texas like Dallas, Austin, Houston. You often get more space, you get scale, but property tax structures can be higher than people expect. The heat can also be extreme, and commute patterns can stretch farther than people anticipate. Now, Charlotte tends to sit in the middle lane. North Carolina has a flat income tax. Property taxes are still relatively reasonable compared to a lot of major metros. Insurance markets are more stable than in coastal regions, and growth here has been layered over time, not explosive, not overnight, right? And for buyers thinking 10 years ahead, that stability matters. None of these cities are bad, they're just different. And when buyers really map out daily life 5 years from now, Charlotte often lands right in the middle ground. Not extreme, but balanced. And balance is gonna win more often than hype. And actually, I'm curious, if you are comparing Charlotte to another city right now, what's the other city that you're thinking of? All right, drop it below in the comments. I'm genuinely interested in what else you have on y'all's list. Now, where Charlotte really separates itself is range. You don't have to choose one version of life and commit to it forever. You can live near Lake Norman and still be 25 minutes to Uptown. You can be on the South End one night and at the golf course in Huntersville the next morning. You could choose Davidson for that small town charm, Valentine for suburban convenience, Matthews for accessibility, and Plaza Midwood for walkability, or push slightly outside the metro for acreage and space. Right? If you work in Uptown, you can live on the South End and take the light rail. You could live in Plaza Midwood and lean more into an urban lifestyle. You could live in Huntersville and trade a slightly longer commute for lake access and larger lots. All right? You could move west toward Denver, Sherrills Ford, and lean into that full lake living without disconnecting entirely. Now, there are very few Southeast cities that offer that many lifestyle lanes inside of one metro footprint. Charlotte isn't just one thing either, right? It's multiple submarkets operating inside of one connected system. That range creates flexibility, and flexibility creates comfort, right? I've worked with families who originally thought they were Florida bound, but when we broke down long-term schools, airport access, Four Seasons, and overall cost structure, Charlotte made more sense for their lifestyle, right? It made more sense for their stage of life, right? Not because Charlotte's flashy, but because it was adaptable. Most moves don't fall in year one. They fall 3 years later when something changes. A job shifts, family grows, priorities evolve, and if your city only works for one version of you, that's when regret starts to creep in, right? Charlotte gives you way more than one version. Right? Now, real quick, if you have made it this far into the video, I appreciate y'all being here. If this video has helped you think through your move a little bit more clearly, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe. All right, I do release 2 videos every single week focused specifically on what it's actually like living here in Charlotte in the Lake Norman area. And as much as I enjoy creating these videos, I am also a licensed real estate broker here. So if you've got questions, even if you're still in that comparison phase, reach out. All right, that number that you see below on the screen, that is my real number. I answer every call, I answer every text, and I respond to every email. All right, no bots. And if you're still in that research phase, I've also put together a Charlotte relocation guide that a lot of my buyers have downloaded before they've ever reached out. All right, almost every one of them has told me that it has helped them think through their move just a little bit more clearly before even reaching out to me. All right, you can grab that as well by getting the QR code on screen. All right, now let's talk about day-to-day life, because this is where cities really separate themselves. Not the weekends, not the highlight reel, just the rhythm of a normal week. All right, work, school, gym, groceries, a couple favorite restaurants, and in most parts of Charlotte, that radius is gonna make a lot of sense, all right? You're not planning your entire life around traffic. You're not driving an hour just to live. Different areas are gonna serve different purposes. South End feels completely different from Lake Norman. Matthews feels different than Cornelius. Fort Mill feels different than Plaza Midwood. And that spread keeps everyday life manageable. Life here feels buildable. You can create routines, you can establish community, you can grow into the city instead of constantly navigating it, right? And when a city feels easy to live in, not just exciting to visit, that usually tells you something important. Now, one piece that often gets overlooked in relocation conversations is employment diversity. Charlotte isn't reliant on a single industry. Yes, banking is strong, it's very strong here, but so is healthcare, so is energy, so is manufacturing, and so is fintech, all right? Cities that rely too heavily on one industry can feel volatile, right? Especially when markets shift. Charlotte has built multiple pillars. Now, combine that with continued airport expansion, infrastructure investment, and corporate relocations into the region, and you're looking at a metro that isn't just growing, it's reinforcing itself, right? Layered growth feels different than boom and bust cycles, right? It feels intentional, and intentional growth tends to age better, right? Now, I want to be clear, Charlotte is not going to be the right fit for everyone. If you want access to the beach 10 minutes from your house, you're not getting that here, right? If you are looking for nonstop nightlife and zero humidity, there are definitely better cities. And if you're trying to avoid all traffic at all costs, growth here might frustrate you. If you want the flashiest city in the Southeast, Charlotte probably won't even scratch that itch, right? Charlotte is steady, it's practical, it's buildable, and for some people, that doesn't feel exciting enough, right? But for families thinking long-term, that steadiness becomes a strength. Right? There is growth here, but there's traffic here, right? Summers are humid, we are in the Southeast. Home prices have increased, but compared to a lot of other Southeast metros, the trade-offs still feel reasonable. You still get major airport access, strong employment diversity, 4 seasons, and lake lifestyle. A metro that's big enough to grow into, but not overwhelming. Right? That middle ground is powerful. And I'll share something personal here. Right? I've relocated my family multiple times. New Jersey to Texas, Texas to Florida, Florida to North Carolina, and what I've learned is this. The city that looks the most exciting on paper isn't always the one that works best long term. The first year feels new no matter where you go. Right? The real test comes later, when routines settle in, when school decisions matter, when commute times add up, when community becomes important. The families I work with aren't chasing hype. They're trying to avoid regret. All right, they want to get it right the first time. Charlotte is going to resonate with people who value longevity over flash, and that's why it keeps rising to the top of the list. If you are in the middle of comparing cities, the hardest part usually isn't narrowing down that list, it's figuring out what actually matters once the move doesn't feel new anymore. The best question isn't which city is best, it's which city still works once things normalize. Charlotte doesn't win every category, but it rarely forces extreme trade-offs. It gives you access without overload, options without chaos, and a place that evolves with you. And for the intentional buyer thinking beyond the first year, that's going to be incredibly appealing. Now, if you've made it this far, you're probably not just casually browsing anymore. You're comparing, you're thinking through real decisions, and at some point, every move stops being about the idea of a city and starts being about how it works for you specifically. If you want to map out what life in Charlotte or Lake Norman would actually look like based on your priorities, let's set up a Zoom call. We'll walk through neighborhoods, commute patterns, lifestyle, all of it. Reach out with the information that you see on screen. I answer every call, every text, and every email. And again, if you are still in that research phase, You can download the Charlotte Relocation Guide below. It has helped a lot of buyers. All right, it's helped a lot of buyers think through their move before they ever make a decision. All right, that's all. We'll see you in the next one.